Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Let's jump right into it. When you buy a stock, you own a piece of a company. Sounds simple, right? Well, not quite. Once you hand over your hard-earned cash, how do you actually control what happens to it? Today, we're completely unpacking the complex machinery of corporate governance, and we're really going to focus in on the fascinating journey of the shareholders. The folks who actually anchor this entire system. Okay, here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the overall corporate governance system, look at shareholders as the real owners, tackle the principal-agent problem, examine the fiduciary shield, and finally, wrap up with what happens when governance fails. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the corporate governance system. So, to really get this, we need to define the playing field first. The Cadbury report gives us this great traditional definition. It's the system by which businesses are directed and controlled. And what's really interesting here is that the word governance actually comes from the Latin verb gubernare, which literally means to steer. Think of a huge corporation like a massive ocean liner. Governance is the whole system of rules, checks, and policies that make sure this massive ship is being steered in the right direction, balancing the money-making goals with the needs of everyone on board. But who's actually at the wheel? Well, corporate governance is essentially a dynamic among three principal players. First, you have the shareholders, the investors, the actual owners. Second, the board of directors, the group elected to oversee the big picture strategy. And third, management, your top executives like the CEO running the day-to-day operations. Now, obviously, employees and customers are incredibly vital to any business, but this specific system of checks and balances, it exists primarily to make sure the shareholders' investment isn't just squandered by the folks steering the ship. Which brings us right to Section 2, shareholders. The real owners. Our source material points out a pretty stark reality. In a modern corporation, the people providing the actual funding are not the ones running the daily operations. The real owners elect the board, who then hire managers to act as their agents. Think about that for a second. Even the most famous, powerful CEOs out there, at the end of the day, they are effectively just hired hands, working for the ultimate owners, the shareholders. Now, everyday folks investing their savings usually have holdings that are way too small to boss management around on a daily basis, so they have to rely on core rights established by law and contract. We're talking about the right to participate in profits, mostly through dividends, the right to vote their shares to elect that board of directors, and the right to inspect the company's books. Basically, this setup is brilliant because it lets you enjoy the financial upside without having to, take personal responsibility for the daily grind of running the business yourself. But that setup isn't perfect. Let's move to Section 3, the principal-agent problem. What happens when the owners aren't making the daily decisions? We run right into agency theory. This is literally the central tension of the entire corporate world. When the principals, the owners, delegate decision-making to their agents, the managers, it creates a massive vulnerability. Because you've separated ownership from control, the shareholders lose direct, effective say over managerial choices. You're basically handing over your money and just hoping they treat it with the exact same respect that you would. And this vulnerability exists because, honestly, human interests rarely align perfectly. Shareholders generally want long-term value, safe dividends, steady stock price appreciation. But managers, well, they might selfishly prioritize empire building. They might make insanely risky acquisitions just to make the company bigger, trying to become more powerful and justify massive salary bumps. Or they might just chase quick, short-term payoffs purely to keep their jobs, even if it totally wrecks the long-term dividends for the actual owners. So we clearly need a defense mechanism. Let's look at Section 4, the fiduciary shield. To stop managers from just acting in their own self-interest, the whole system relies on the board of directors acting as a fiduciary. Now, a fiduciary is someone with a strict legal and ethical duty to protect the assets and interests of the shareholders. The board is elected specifically to serve as this ultimate shield. They are there to oversee management and make sure the company's resources are treated as a sacred trust on behalf of the owners. Crucially, the board's job is to direct and oversee, not to micromanage daily operations. They have to critically appraise the company's strategy. The sources are super clear on this point. A board must have the backbone to challenge a strong-willed CEO. Actually, let's put it stronger than that. If they just sit there and blindly rubber stamp whatever the higher hands want without any real probing or debate, they've completely abdicated their duty. They've failed the very shareholders they were elected to protect. But what if that carefully constructed shield completely shatters? That brings us to our final section, when governance fails. The sources give us a truly chilling case study of this. Enron. At Enron, management just went completely unchecked. The CFO, Andrew Fausto, actually set up private, independent partnerships to conduct business directly with Enron, which violates so many conflict of interest principles. Management used these private partnerships to hide massive, crippling liabilities and debts that would have otherwise exposed the company's true financial health. And the board? The board just allowed it to happen. They utterly failed in their fiduciary duty to oversee this self-serving management, and it led straight to bankruptcy and a catastrophic wipeout of the shareholders' investments. Which brings us right back to you, and a pretty vital question to ask yourself. If you own even a single share of stock, whether you bought it directly or it's sitting in a mutual fund or your pension plan, do you actually know who is steering your ship? Corporate governance is not just some dry, abstract business concept. It is the vital working machinery that protects your investments and your future. Understanding this delicate balance between shareholders, boards, and management is really the very first step to becoming an empowered owner. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning who's really at the wheel.